It is Joe Thomas again in for Lars Larson, coming to you from the second greatest city in the history of mankind, based on the work product of a couple of our kids, Jefferson and Madison. You may have heard of them. 1-866-HEY-LARS is the phone number, as always, and you can join in with us there. You can also email me directly. It's joe@wchv.com. That's Lars's affiliate here in Charlottesville, Virginia. So much to get into. We're going to push aside the indictments of the electors in Michigan to the next segment, because we're going to visit with another one of Lars's affiliates, WILS, in Lansing, Michigan. Their news director is going to join us, give us some of the on-the-ground details of that. I want to get into whistleblowers then and now, and we'll get there in a moment. John Kerry and the Chi-Coms were having quite a sit-down. I don't know if they were all impressed with his carbon footprint or not. You know what they say about guys with a big carbon footprint. The president is pitched again to do more cash giveaways. This guy gives away more money than all the Powerball lottery tickets, which, by the way, $1 billion. Remember when $1 billion lottery prize was a big deal? Remember when $1 billion was a big deal? I'm old enough to remember lottery prizes when they cracked $1 million. That was something else. But the president wants to give Medicaid, and is fighting again to get Medicaid money for the Dreamers. And this is another one of those things that has grown exponentially after, the first complaints, and oh no, it's just going to be for the poor, and don't be so mean, and you're so mean, and you shouldn't just. And yet, once you've let the camel get a few of its appendages under the tent flap, there it is in your tent with you. But I want to start with whistleblowers then and now, and the IRS hearings that were going on in the Capitol. Oh, I want to forget the Lars Larson Twitter poll yesterday, and I'm surprised by this result. 78.5% of people said, oh, no, this is an older poll. I'm looking for the one from yesterday. This is the one about judges. I'll find the one from yesterday and give you the results, because it was a runaway. But cash bail is on the docket in Illinois. Should states follow Illinois' lead in eliminating cash bail for criminals? Now, that ties into one of our guests tonight. He's the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, who is in trouble with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Persons. And all that word salad right there, I think advancement is the one they have the most trouble with saying. That's why they just like to use their acronym NAACP now. They're mad because Governor Youngkin is following a document that they helped write. The document is called the Virginia Constitution. You say, Joe, isn't the Virginia Constitution much older than that? No. Now, you see, the Commonwealth of Virginia rewrote its constitution in the late 60s. A UVA professor named Dick Howard, who I have met, was the lead of this team that included assistance from the American Civil Liberties Union and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Persons. So I find it interesting that the chief of the NAACP is mad at Governor Youngkin for following a document that they helped write. But I'm going to tell you, my shirts are always freshly pressed with this much irony around. But meanwhile, back to Washington, where the whistleblowers got their day, and Joe Ziegler is one of, and really laid it out pretty clearly. Let me give you a clip here.
But I have no problem with companies making reasonable profits. But it's got to be a fair competition for that.
No, that's Joe Biden, not Joe Ziegler. Apologies, I may have pulled up the wrong one there for you, but that's without question. This is Gary Shapley interacting with one of the Democrat members of the hearing committee, Raja Krishnamoorthy. The Republicans do this frequently, too.
You didn't have to be the president to have election meddling.
No, but the question is this. Was he the president at that time, in April 2020?
It's been asked and answered.
And what's the answer, sir?
The election
answer is yes or no?
Is no.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, may I finish?
And then Joe Ziegler, along with this is Jamie Raskin.
The certain deductions that were taken on the tax return, that's for you guys to decide whether the felony was there or not. But the point is that we're bringing.
That's for the U.S. attorney to decide, and I'm afraid we're not going to be able to investigate every tax case in America.
That's you see how quickly they want to shirk the responsibility of actually legislating, and this is the same group that will turn around and point at law enforcement officers and say, I don't know what they're doing, arresting you people on the streets, burning things and stealing people's private property. Why would we want them to arrest you? That shouldn't be against the law, and that's how we wind up with people like the Soros prosecutors running all over the place. And that's the problem begins, and I've pointed this out to my local audience here in Charlottesville as well. It begins when President Obama said that he was going to direct the drug enforcement agencies to stop enforcing marijuana possession laws. And I thought, well, gosh, then are there other laws that law enforcement officers can pick and choose what they enforce or not? And that's since that moment, that itchy mania has gripped our country. And it's really metastasized in the poorest communities where they feel like, well, if law enforcement can pick and choose which laws they enforce, then they busted my cousin. It must have been because of some external stimuli. And we can't have that. We cannot have that if there's going to be a rule of law. And we're going to get into the two-tier justice system and whether, the Biden family should be held to a different standard than the electors who are now facing the rest of their lives in prison in Michigan, because it certainly seems like there's a zeal to prosecute regular people who are just trying to do their part, whereas somebody who has grown excruciatingly wealthy while in a representative office, and you can tell me I'm wrong, 866-HEY-LARS, love to hear about it. I really enjoyed Monday night talking to folks. A lot of people criticize me because in morning radio there aren't the diversity of callers that there is in the evening when there's more time for somebody to sit there and say, I got something to say to that guy. So it was fun on Monday talking to some folks that I had never talked to before, and I hope to hear from you as well. Or you can email joe@wchv.com. But again, vote in the Twitter poll about cash bail. And the Twitter poll, of course, thanks to AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens, conservative values we believe in. Call them at 888-262-2006. AMAC is better, and this is the Lars Larson Show. Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. You can call in at 866-HEY-LARS. My name is Joe Thomas, sitting in for Lars tonight. And to seed our conversation on obviously one of the big news stories of the day, the indictments of these electors, these alternate electors in Michigan. To join us to break it down, one of Lars's great affiliates in Lansing, WILS News Director Rich Hurl is on the line with us. Rich, thank you for taking a little time out and to kind of shed the light into beyond what, a paragraph and a half on a news website might give this. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me, Joe.
So these alternate electors, as I understand it, were basing what they were doing on precedent set in Hawaii in 1960, where the Kennedy campaign basically deputized electors should a recount, come through fruition. Am I getting that information correctly?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm not sure about the president, but it's such a unique situation, such a unique story that has happened here. This is something that goes back to December of 2020 when. According to the Michigan Attorney General's office, as everyone knows, they made the announcement of the charges just yesterday. And according to the documents from her office, she claims that these, that this Republican group had gone to the Capitol for a meeting. They were turned away, and then they met secretly in the basement of the state Republican Party headquarters and falsely signed documents that indicated that they were the qualified electors for president and vice president, and they submitted those documents. And it had been really under scrutiny ever since. The Republicans say that they did nothing wrong, and if they did do something wrong, that they don't know that it was illegal. And but Nessel says it was, and that she has the evidence to prove that, and that I'm sure will come out in due time. But yeah, it's just a matter of who are the qualified electors? Is it this Republican group, or was it the group of people that Nessel says was actually certified by the Board of State Canvassers prior to this supposed meeting that took place at the Republican Party headquarters. It's a bizarre story, and you've got two sides that really could not be any more different from each other.
Was there currently, and I guess that's the question, a couple of legal eagles have told me that there were states that were in question, but was Michigan one of the states where the Republican committee was challenging the results or asking for a recanvassing or a recount?
I think that's correct. My understanding is that's correct.
Okay.
There were a handful of states, and I think another take on this from the Republican side is that these documents were signed by this Republican group in hopes that everything would turn out well for Donald Trump. There were recounts. You had many challenges to not just Michigan but across the country, and this Republican group was just hoping that everything would pan out for Donald Trump. I think maybe there was some confidence that everything would be okay, but clearly that has not been the case, and now. There's just a lot of questions over, did they do anything illegal here? And obviously you've got the black and white of the story. The Attorney General's office says, yes, they did. The Republicans said that they did not.
Well, what is, and I understand the Attorney General bringing these charges. What was with the lag? Why did it take more than 2 years to bring these charges?
That's a great question, and that's kind of a great point you bring up, because there are a lot of questions over that because the timing here is interesting, considering that these charges were announced on the same day that Trump had announced that he had learned that he was the target of the election probe and the January 6th insurrection. And so, there are a lot of questions about that. Yeah, why is this being brought up now? Is that one of the reasons why?
Right.
And this is where some of the Republicans and even members of this Republican group, they're saying this is a personal vendetta. It's all political, the timing of this, it is very interesting.
And I understand forgery is one of the charges. Is it because these documents aren't the official, letters authorizing somebody to be an elector? So I couldn't figure out where forgery came into it, because I imagine they all use their own signatures. Is the forgery part of this, the documents?
Yeah, I believe so. The charges are forgery, election law forgery, uttering and publishing, and there are also conspiracy charges, conspiracy to commit, forgery, election law forgery. And so those were the charges that each defendant is facing. Some of those are 14-year felonies. Others are 5-year felonies. Wow. And so yeah, that's what's been handed down,
time.
and court appearances for each individual will be coming up soon. No official date on each one, but there'll be plenty of legal activity from this point on.
Have they been arrested? Because a lot of folks are saying that this is a tactic to lean on them the way they used to. You get a low-level capo in the mafia, and then you lean on him and he flips, and now you have RICO charges. Have these folks been arrested, or has this just been an unsealed indictment?
I don't believe anyone has been arrested. If they have, I have not heard about it.
Okay.
My understanding is these are, the information that has come out it's come out based on documents that were released by the state attorney general's office. And my understanding, I don't believe that anyone has actually been put behind bars, at least not yet.
Well, I appreciate giving us some insight in what's going on, and please, keep us in your Rolodex so that we can keep an eye on this, because this certainly seems to be timed interestingly. Has the Attorney General done any Q&As, or was this just an announcement from her office?
No, this was just a video that was released.
Mm-hmm.
There was no. My understanding is that there was no press involved. It was just a video. I think it was just a recorded video that had come out. I don't think there was any word prior to that it was going to be anything with the press. And when Dana Nessel was had shared everything, she was looking right out the camera and not looking around to other reporters. So I believe it was just her on video, and that's it.
Rich Hurl is the news director at our Lars's great affiliate, WILS in Lansing, Michigan. I appreciate it. I know you have an early call in the morning, and keep up the great work. And we appreciate you giving us some of the on-the-ground intel out of Michigan and on these indictments. And you have a great evening.
All right, thanks, Joe. You too.
And, to your thought, though, I'd like to hear your side of this, because, I immediately thought of the pressure tactics that RICO cases often involve. You get a couple of people, you lean on them a little bit, you say, listen, you're 60, 70 years old. We could put you away for, the charges are enough that we could put you away for 20, 30 years. That's the rest of your life. Plus, you're going to have to spend all your IRA, 401ks on defending yourself. Do you think that this is perhaps coordinated? You're listening to the Lars Larson Show. 866, hey, Lars. Well, here's Joe Thomas, actually, filling in for Lars from the second greatest city in the history of mankind, Charlottesville, Virginia. You can get to us through the traditional ways, 1-866-HEY-LARS. You can also email me directly at joe@wchv.com. And vote in our Twitter poll. This one's interesting. It's about cash bail. We're going to get into something similar like that with the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia a little bit later on in the program. It's brought to you by AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. And that's about age, sometimes behavior. It has conservative values we all believe in, and I'm part, and so is Lars. Go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better for you, better for America, and you can find all that Twitter stuff on Twitter at Lars Larson Show. Joining us on the line is best-selling author of books like Red Hot Lies, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming, Power Grab, all some of my favorites. But then during his chase for how these rent seekers were spending your taxpayer money to give to their cronies, he discovered people like Richard Windsor not being a real person, he being an alias for EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson, who used that email account to break the law pretty badly. And he caught her, and she got promoted, and I think got a pretty hefty pension for her punishment there. Chris Horner is on with us. Chris, how are you doing this evening, sir?
Great, Joe. Thank you.
Your CV sound pretty good on the radio there. Did I leave any? Of course, I left the most recent out. That led you to get started with a group called the Government Accountability and Oversight, govoversight.org. Read. Most of the things there are the work product of so many great folks whose favorite four-letter word is FOIA, and Chris chronicles it so well for you there, but support what they do, govoversight.org there. And you wrote a piece just the other day that after COVID, I think everyone said, what's going to be the horse race to the next existential health emergency that we're going to all have to lock down in our basement for? And I feel like it's still a horse race between gun violence and climate, but you actually have documents now that are about the climate stuff, Chris, right?
Right. It was, in fact, a colleague of mine, Matt Harden, and I had obtained in some FOIA, this Federal Freedom of Information Act litigation, on behalf of a group called Energy Policy Advocates. We had obtained some documents just over a week ago that showed the Biden EPA preparing to declare a climate emergency. And, of course, this is administration. We now know we can't say about it, oh, they'd never do that. And, in fact, what we found is that after the administration was dealt a loss in the United States Supreme Court at the end of June last year, it was a case called West Virginia versus EPA, which struck down this. You heard for years about these cap and trade schemes and other EPA rules when Congress refused to give them that authority, and EPA said, oh, you know what, it turns out we had it here between the sofa cushions anyway. The Supreme Court struck them down again in trying to impose the climate agenda. After that opinion came down, June 30th of last year, there was intense pressure, no doubt from within, certainly assistance from within, we can prove, but from without, reported in Washington Post and elsewhere, pressure on the Biden administration to declare there is a climate emergency for the purpose of saying we don't need no stinking laws. They kept trying to impose something no Congress has ever approved. And we know the solution when you're denied the authority is not to say, well, okay, maybe we can persuade the public and their elected representatives. It's to try to claim you have the authority, or in this case, make a claim of an emergency to then get around the law. And even that, it's a harebrained idea, right? If you look at the specifics, it's even more harebrained. There is a National Emergencies Act, and it gives presidents the authority to declare emergencies and exercise any emergency authority in a particular law, not just to get out of the law free card. But that's what we see the administration trying to do, and you're not inaccurate in saying it was sort of the next step post-COVID lockdowns. There's a push for climate lockdowns. And we actually have now emails circulating, dated almost a year ago today, July 22nd of last year, a memo, a proposal for, quote, climate emergency initiative. So we know they did spend administrative taxpayer time and resources to prepare for this. And remember, that's no small feat. This is an administration that didn't spend any time to prepare for the inevitable, right? The rising interest rates, or that which they, in theory, planned for, the Afghan withdrawal. Here they were actually preparing to do this. And if you've seen, I'll close with this, in the last few days, numerous far-left members of Congress have been demanding declaration of a climate emergency. As I asked a reporter who wrote this up in the Daily Caller, what UN conference or strange climatological phenomenon called July do you think they might have been preparing this for?
Yes, the hottest days in the history of the planet Earth, Chris. I mean,
so keep your eyes open for this.
Well, and I picked up on a story. Matt Taibbi published it on Substack yesterday, and it's documents that go back into the knowledge and awareness, even to the beginning, that they needed a narrative that said, oh, this couldn't have possibly been a man-made virus. And I'm going to connect this for a reason. And this goes back to the earliest days of SARS-CoV-2, that they were already trying to spin a narrative that we didn't have anything to do with this. Just today, the Biden administration announced that they're ceasing funding to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Like you said, they never make any preparations for anything. They said, we better cut the funding for these. So up until this point, we've still been funding this. So here's John Kerry in China with his massive carbon footprint. And I see the game being played and spun out again. We had the off-Broadway opening, Chris. We did the virus thing. Now people are dying, the crops are dying, and we need to lock everyone down and start rationing. Am I crazy to think that?
So
Thank you.
During the COVID lockdowns, there was an increasing brazenness by environmentalists and others among the statist/far left saying, see, we've shown we can do it. Now it's time to do it for climate. Very openly, reported widely. I went through the headlines and the stories in a talk you can find at the Young America's Foundation website. They were openly stating the thing they say, oh, we'd never do now. We're back to the Orwellian, we've never been at war with East Asia, or never said we'd go to war with East Asia. It was widely reported that now that you've shown you can do it, we need to do it again for this. And again, there's a lot of pretextual behavior here. As you know, this has been pushed by this, it's called the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They were created, just like you say, well, COVID could not have been man-made. That's the assumption. Here, the operating assumption is, well, climate's cyclical, as we know. Climate cannot be natural. Whatever happens, and now we know that means weather, any weather event, if it's hot, not if it's cold. If it's wet, maybe. Generally, if it's dry. But if it supports the narrative, well, that can't be natural. Well, there's a real authoritarian impulse. And the first solution to problems is always, of course, more government. It was never big enough. But another solution to problems is to amplify them if they support it's too good to check out. And in this case, it's a wonderful pretext to do what we've seen they desperately haven't managed to do. Yep.
Chris, I've got to run to a break here. Can we hang on to you?
Sure.
This is the Lars Larson Show with Chris Horner on with Joe Thomas.
We came to Beijing in order to unstick what has been stuck for almost a year, and that's the in-person dialogue between the United States and China.
And notice how the Secretary of Energy, or whatever he is, the special envoy for climate, doesn't talk about anything specific. See, the open platitudes are imperative in the climate discussion, as it has been for decades. Author of Red Hot Lies, Power Grab, Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming, The Liberal War on Transparency, his magnum opus. Chris Horner from the Government Accountability and Oversight Group, govoversight.org. Great articles about all this stuff. Matt Harden as well. Their favorite four-letter word is FOIA, and they can always use your help. But, Chris, we were talking about where we are and where we're heading forward. But this is back to the future in so much because I'm watching rolling brownouts in California again, and Gavin Newsom is saying, see, I told you so. They just asked Californians to go forward with the plan to plug their electric cars in, not to charge them, but to charge the grid in California when they're not driving them. I mean, you say, where's Bugs Bunny saying, it's not the stove? This is getting cartoonish.
Why did no one see this coming? Oh, that's right.
That's right.
For years, a Dowdy band has been pointing out exactly what's going on, including, to your audio clip, that China, first Russia, then China, have been playing the West for absolute, utter saps, and very well on this issue for, you're right, decades. And it was always, no, you go first and we'll go next time. And the next time it's, well, you didn't go far enough. And so next time's a big deal for these people. And it's always, well, we need capacity development and wealth transfers. And so it's, well, you promised more. And it turned out to be, well, $100 billion a year wealth transfer to us. As you hobble yourselves in the name of this, and then you send the money to us, this, as you know, when I was a younger man, I used to go to these annual UN conferences and just watch this play out in real time. And it was difficult to conceive what sort of blinders you have to put on yourself to not see what's transpiring. But I suppose the crowd who are willing to so self-deceive is thin, because you'll see they keep bringing back John Kerry et al. To do this, and they are very slow learners. It is at our cost. You see now our national security peril. You described California. We are clearly headed for that as a nation. If you don't believe me, take a very good look at Europe, where they are committing economic suicide, insisting it's going to make them all rich, and it's not fair if we don't do it to ourselves too. At some point, do you figure this is so good for us, you're missing out, and it's not fair, we're going to make it illegal for you to import your products to us or export them to us, and we'll import them and so on without carbon taxes, because it's not fair if we don't do this economic miracle to ourselves too. Meanwhile, China's doing the right thing. Obviously, they fear a loss of control, and the public hasn't, they have their priorities there, keeping the lights on. That is no longer a priority here. Reliability, if you can believe it, in the West of our electrical production transmission system is actually at grave risk. It's yes, you're forcing all of these things that are so great they have to be mandated and so heavily subsidized.
And Chris,
you're forcing them onto the grid, but you're forcing the things that work to close, and that's the real threat.
Well, and then on top of it, because this is such a good idea, we've hired lawyers to work with government officials to go after the people who raise their hand and say, "Excuse me, I've got a question about this." And this is where, if you hear them going after gun manufacturers, you hear them going after automobile, they learned it in the pursuit of silencing voices like Chris's by sending lawyers. Michael Bloomberg, very good at it, sending lawyers to work under the auspice of being attorneys general and even congressional committees like the ones we're watching play out with the IRS whistleblowers. They're sending people even into the halls of Congress, aren't they, Chris?
Right, and to provide staff to Congress to conduct oversight to provide staff to Congress like that is a violation if you receive it. So George Soros' foundation has boasted of providing resources to beef up congressional oversight. They can give it. It's just against the rules to take it. Same with this Pierre Omidyar, the eBay Democratic donor. And they're following in the tracks of Michael Bloomberg, placing private activist attorneys in attorneys general offices. The Hewlett Foundation placing staff, climate, energy staff. The Wall Street Journal editorialized something we found a few years ago. Jay Inslee there in Washington and others, but Jay Inslee first brought in privately provided staff to be his energy advisors, and they were from activist ideological groups. And it's expanding. I was just looking at some documents that I expect to come out somewhat soon about the Mountain West. They're providing staff, non-staff staff, all over state government. And now, as you pointed out, and this has not received sufficient attention, Congress as well. The United States Congress received, the Oversight Committee was taking private lawyers, investigators to beef up, to guide the investigation of political opponents. That was the energy industry, and the chairman said they were going to move on to people who support the industry and their public affairs, their voices. Silence opposition. Where have you heard this before? Seems to be deemed the best path to victory. And with the Bloomberg scheme, we've asked for years, does anybody see a problem with this? Well, now at Congress, would you please police yourself? Because this is in violation of your do rules matter.
Well, and so this is why I'm scared for what's going to come next with this. I mean, I can see the policing and the legal development, because they don't do anything until they know they have the laws. So what are they writing now that they will use later and say, oh, no, that's been on the books for years? Because, we react to it when it happens, and they've already planned it 2 or 3 years, if that little, in advance, don't they, Chris?
Yes, and so here's what's happening. The people's elected representatives continue to deny radical grants of authority, and so radical administrations or administrations who run as moderates and then bring in the same people they would have brought in if Howard Dean or Bernie were elected. And you see what they're doing is taking existing law. For example, what we talked about in the previous segment, the EPA brought in somebody known as the law whisperer. What is that obscure cultural reference? Well, he teaches old laws new tricks. That's his tag. And then in that West Virginia Supreme Court, they handed down an opinion saying no more law whispering. So now they're you read govoversight.org and Climate Litigation Watch and watch this space. They are, in fact, fibbing about this. The first rule of law whispering now is don't talk about law whispering. And we see all of these seminars where they're advising the administration, just don't talk about law whispering. Say you're actually regulating water effluent, but it's to shut down power plants. Say you're actually doing this with ash, but it's to shut down plants. So what they're doing is they're reinventing their authority because Congress won't give it to them.
Chris Horner, govoversight.org. I want to hear your thoughts. 866 Hey Lars coming up. Thank you for letting us be of service to you. My name is Joe Thomas, and I am sitting in for Lars, and thank you for receiving all this. I want to hear from you. We've laid a bunch of stuff out already. 866 Hey Lars, 866-439-5277. Show of hands, how many people realize that every time somebody talks about climate and the damage that's being done to climate, it's something that humans emit, especially carbon dioxide? The Republican Congress just put out a proposal to pick up where President Trump left off, planting millions and millions of trees. What do trees consume? Carbon dioxide. And we're not the green movement. Yet we're the ones who want to plant trees, not cut them down and put up solar cells. So your thoughts on that? And thanks to Chris Horner, author of Red Hot Lies, Power Grab, because it's back. John Kerry and his very impressive carbon footprint was in China, showing it off for them there. Also, the charges brought by the Michigan Attorney General in what I think is going to be just the beginning of a series of these. I think you may see the same thing happen in Georgia, where they'll bring charges like forgery. That's an interesting charge in the Michigan one, isn't it? Forgery, meaning they produced documents that said, I am an elector for the state of Michigan, and they didn't have permission to. So they always find these places in there. You can email us at joe@wchv.com. And I got one during the news break from Ken. I like this one. Ken writes in. He said, Mr. Trump brought Diet Coke into the White House. Mr. Biden replaced it with real Coke. Of course, the investigation continues, doesn't it? You can go on Twitter at Lars Larson Show. Our Twitter poll is up there, and it has to do with cash bail. How's that been working out for New York City, my hometown? As a matter of fact, the mayor is actually a high school classmate of mine. We weren't friends. Of course, that's easy enough to say. I didn't have that many friends in high school, sort of predisposing me to a career in radio. But Lars's Twitter poll this evening: should states follow Illinois' lead in eliminating cash bail for criminals? Currently, 79%, almost 80% say no, 20% say yes. And I'd be curious, if you're one of those 20%ers, what is it you're seeing that says that that's a good idea, that violating someone's rights? And I'll be the first to tell you, we have criminalized things. I think it was Bernard Carrick, the former police chief of New York City, but he had joined a group called Right on Crime. And they're still around. They were the ones who helped Donald Trump write quite a bit of his criminal justice reform that had the American left in a blind panic. You want to know the moment, in my view anyway, that Donald Trump became existentially dangerous to the left was when he started doing criminal justice reform with Right on Crime. Just as a tangent here, I'll get back to Bernard Carrick in a second. And the black community said, well, hell, what is going on here? The Republican is the one doing criminal justice reform. And they were flocking to the Republican Party, so they had to reinstitute white supremacy. They had to bring back the knights in white satin, the guys with the tiki torches and the, blood and soil following David Duke into my hometown now, Charlottesville, Virginia, so that they could boogeyman, because people were starting to notice that these poor downtrodden inner cities had been run by Democrats for decades. Baltimore can trace its depression all the way back to Nancy Pelosi's dad. And so all of a sudden, the left was feeling a little exposed. And so they had to bring back the boogeyman of white supremacy. So back to Bernard Kerik. Bernard Kerik said, we're filling our prisons up with people who do things we don't like rather than filling them with people who we are truly afraid of. So Donald Trump takes this campaign and really reworks criminal justice. And that was the moment that they said, man's got to go. And it became serious because they couldn't lose that portion of their voting bloc. We got into the whistleblower story as well. So your thoughts on the IRS whistleblower hearings. Remember when whistleblowers were sanctified people? Where there was the good old days, Sonny, come up here and sit down on the porch and have a country time with me. The good old days when a whistleblower could be walking down the hallway and overhear one half of a conversation about what somebody heard in another conversation in another room a couple of days ago, and they could go and get whistleblower protection. Remember the good old days when that? Now they're existential threats to the republic. So we've been there as well, and the president, now flush with being able to give student loan forgiveness to left-handed gingers from the Outback or wherever. He keeps requalifying who he can give student loan relief to. Now he wants to give more Medicaid to dreamers. And Medicaid is one of those things that there was a pushback. I mean, go listen to Ronald Reagan's Time for Choosing speech, and you'll understand. I mean, this is not new. What is that? That's approaching 60 years old, isn't it? My gosh. 60 years ago. But the point was he actually does some remarkable mathematics during the Time for Choosing speech where he talks about the amount spent on the bureaucracy in 1964. And one morning I was bored. And I decided to see if I could find some statistics, and the federal government's website is easy enough to kind of troll through. And I found some statistics on the amount we budget for aid programs, and I put together that with the number of people who are on those aid programs. And sure enough, wouldn't you know, without even having to adjust for inflation, Ronald Reagan's mathematics that he did in 1964 still pencil out. That if we just took the money that we put aside for things like Medicaid and just gave it to the people who qualify, they'd be doing better. Of course, we'd have all these unemployed bureaucrats in Northern Virginia, and what in the world would we do with them? And on the cash bail subject, Governor Glenn Youngkin is going to be on with us tonight from the Commonwealth of Virginia. And he's taking heat from the National Association of Colored Persons. I want to go into this story a little bit because there is hypocrisy that's almost hip deep in this, and it's not just Virginia related. But I want your thoughts as well. 866-HEY-LARS is the phone number, 866-HEY-LARS, or joe at WCHV.com. Joe Thomas here for Lars tonight from the second greatest city in the history of mankind, Charlottesville, Virginia. You think about it, well, you got Galilee and then Charlottesville. And I know Galilee didn't have riots in 2017 or anything like that, but when you think of the work product of some of our native sons, more people live in freedom on this planet as a percentage of population, never mind just in aggregate, than any other time in human history. I mentioned Lars's Twitter poll that you can take online at Lars Larson Show on Twitter. Should states follow Illinois' lead in eliminating cash bail for criminals? 78% say no. 21, almost 22% say yes, and I'm just curious about that. 866-HEY-LARS is the phone number. That translates 866-439-5277. Governor Glenn Youngkin of the Commonwealth of Virginia is going to join us. However, Greg is on line 2 for us, so let me find out what Greg's got in his thought process. Good evening, Greg. How are you, sir?
Well, I have a lot, but I know I'm limited in time. And basically, the Democrat Party is the transfer of wealth party. Yeah. And when I say that, I mean the transfer of wealth party from the middle class to the very wealthy and the very poor. We're the mules. And then you've got John Kerry, we talked about earlier, that hobbles their mule. You know, I don't know if anybody out there know what hobbles mean. That means they tie their feet together so they can barely walk, with all the rigorous EPA mess. And then they make people wealthy with the environmental situation by subsidies. And this is the name of the game. And us mules, the middle class, are the sufferers of all this. And mention to Glenn, too, that they are going to, you know, the Virginia legislation signed on something where they don't want anything but electric cars by a certain date. That ain't going to work. Let me just tell you something. It ain't going to work.
Well, that was back in the bad old days, and in a lot of states. I mean, Arizona's seen this, but the Pacific Northwest is living this nightmare. But when Donald Trump got elected, Greg, and I appreciate it, sir, and thank you. When Donald Trump was elected, a campaign began to drive people out of the Republican Party. And again, it goes back to, and I watched it happen here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, lots of good, solid Republican legislators. And we have a part-time legislature. It only meets for a few months here and a few months there. They quit. They said, I'm not, either they weren't running for re-election or they just flat out resigned. And the Republican Party didn't have anyone really ready to replace this kind of exodus. So the next election cycle, seats that had been in Republican control for a decade or more became led by Democrats, and the Democratic Party took control of the Virginia House and Senate. They had Governor Northam, and they said, here, hold my beer, and went ahead. You may have seen at some point the very famous testimony of one of our delegates, Kathy Tran, who was being interrogated by another member of the House in a committee where she had a bill that would have allowed for abortion right up to the baby cresting its birth. Well, that's conservative to what we got now. And so the question is, to every elected body, are you ready to put the genies back in the bottle? And that climate point Greg made is right from that wheelhouse where because we had left, it's just like we're hopping around on our left foot. We signed a deal that said anything California does, we can do better. And Governor Northam had this grandiose scheme of being, and the phrases are very, very interesting in this, carbon neutral, net zero. They don't mean what they think. You think they mean something, but they don't. Net zero and all that. And that's where all that comes from. Joining us now from the Commonwealth of Virginia, he is the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia. He is Governor Youngkin. Glenn, good evening. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing? There he is. Governor, how are you doing?
Joe, I'm just thrilled to be with you, and just fun to talk about Virginia. Things are really motoring. We've had incredibly strong financial performance last year. Our job growth numbers are strong. Things are going great, and I'm so excited to get a chance to talk about it.
And CNBC put us in at number 2. We're silver medal. We'll get back to number 1, I think, right?
I'm never happy with number 2. I think the key is the results. Our results are incredibly strong. But we still need to continue to make big steps in reducing the cost of doing business and reducing the cost of living. And those are 2 things very high on my priority list. I think Virginia will be, not just by CNBC standards, but by national standards, the best place to do business, and we're continuing to drive there.
Now, this may surprise a lot of people across the nation, but in just about 1 month, every seat in our General Assembly is up for election, and by September 22nd, that's when voting begins. And you're trying to encourage people of a conservative mind who love their election day, but to get out and what you're calling it, the Secure Your Vote campaign?
SecureYourVoteVirginia.com. And we are encouraging Virginians to make a plan to vote early. And particularly, Republicans got to get off the sidelines. And if we miss an election because you wait till election day and you get sick or a child is sick or something happens at work, well, then your vote's not counted. And so we want Republicans to make a plan to vote early. And yes, many folks want to vote on election day. Just make sure you get there. But that's why SecureYourVoteVirginia.com is so important. You can go, you can sign up to be on the permanent absentee ballot. You can get a mail-in ballot. You can make a plan to vote early. We encourage everybody to do it. We've got our entire General Assembly up. We have currently a split legislature with a House that is controlled by Republicans and a Senate that's controlled by Democrats. I want to hold our House. I want to flip the Senate. And early voting is going to be a key part of that. So go to SecureYourVoteVirginia.com. Make a plan to vote early.
And you rolled up your sleeves and actually put some campaign folks out in the field trying to get some early voting and absentee voting coordination out there, which is a bold move. Obviously it hasn't started yet, but are they ramping up and getting ready to get out there and knock on doors and get some ballots in some boxes?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, this is a fast approaching election. It's a critical one. I do think that we've demonstrated that common sense, conservative policies and decisions can take a state that was ranked 47th in job recovery coming out of the pandemic in the last administration and catapult us to top 5 in the nation in job growth. And we can make schools focus their efforts on excellence and empowering parents, and we can get law enforcement back to the front of the line as opposed to demeaning them. And guess what? We can run government better. And I just believe this is a moment for Virginians to come to the polls, and hopefully they like what we're doing. I think they do, and they can extend our license to lead by holding the House and flipping the Senate.
And now, yesterday, your education proposals came from your Department of Education, and I was looking at it, and it's not anything like they say. It's really, this is doubling down on parents' authority, isn't it, Governor Youngkin?
Yeah, absolutely. And we by Virginia law, have to issue transgender policy, model policies, and then the school systems by law have to adopt policies that are materially consistent with them. The previous governor did not require parents to be notified, and that's just wrong. It's not consistent with federal law and with our state law, where parents have a fundamental right to make decisions with regards to their children's education, upbringing, and care. And we just believe parents must be at the head of the table. And that's the whole foundation of these policies, which first empower parents to make these decisions with their child, not to allow politicians, bureaucrats, and counselors to get out in front of teachers. But then second of all, to protect children. And at the end of the day, we know that study after study shows that family counseling and parental involvement have much better outcomes. And on top of that, we've got to make sure we protect children from bullying. And so we were able to incorporate one of our new laws that we passed this past year in Virginia, and I signed, that requires schools to notify families within 24 hours of bullying institute. So these are really, I believe, common sense standards that make sure that we are respecting parents' role, because kids belong to parents, not to the
Governor
state.
Youngkin, I got to hang on to you a second on the Lars Larson Show. Joe Thomas in for Lars tonight, 866-HEY-LARS. I want to hear from you, and I held on. We ran out of time there. Roy writes in, if COVID's over, why isn't it back to Election Day? Because Virginia and so many other states, Michigan, other ones, they passed laws that changed their election law. They didn't pass a temporary measure. See, that's the problem. Everyone thought, oh, well, it's a temporary measure. No, they passed legislation that said we shall now vote for these many days, or we shall allow Mark Zuckerberg to go out with his walk-around list from the Eric software and cull votes from people that had no interest in them whatsoever. Governor, we were talking about your transgender policy, and I think this is important for everyone to hear, because we get boxed in on the subject of transgender issues, and I think a lot of it is because we don't want to talk about it as a mental health care issue. And if somebody hates themselves, that's something that needs to be talked about. So therapists talk to somebody, and we stigmify that, and kids avoid that, and parents don't want that. But it's hard to lean into that. But that is an important part, and if we ignore it, that's at our peril too, isn't it? In transgender discussions in schools.
100% agree, Joe. And this is at the heart of one of the most important transformation projects that we've undertaken, which is called Right Help Right Now. It's a full transformation of Virginia's behavioral health system. It's being overwhelmed, and particularly with our young people. And so we've embarked on a 3-year transformation to build capacity so that folks can get the help when they need it, right when they need it. It includes preventative care. It includes a teleservice at 988, which is national, but Virginia's done a great job rolling it out. It includes counselors in schools. It includes building capacity outside of hospitals with mobile crisis units and crisis receiving units. We've got to get moving here. And all of that includes the clear notion that we need a workforce that fundamentally embeds the capabilities in the state. We have a shortage of psychiatrists and psychologists and psychiatric nurse practitioners and counselors. And so we've got to build this workforce. And then finally, it does all get back to the fact that when a child needs help, they need, yes, professional capabilities around them, and they need their families and their parents. And so that's why this comprehensively speaks to those issues. And I'd say finally, Joe, that one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing is the absolute lack of understanding about how deadly fentanyl is. One pill can kill. And so we've had a massive effort to educate, particularly, again, our young people, that if they were to receive some sort of pill from a friend, they think it's something else. It's oftentimes laced with this just horrific drug, fentanyl. We have seen overdoses skyrocket, and so much of it is unexpected poisonings. And so we've got to get on this. And so this is also part of our big effort this year to not only educate everyone about the tragic consequences of fentanyl, but also ways to combat it, so that we're training everybody with Narcan to make sure that everybody can revive a friend. This is all part of a comprehensive effort to address the behavioral health crisis that we're seeing across Virginia, but particularly with our young people.
Last one, real quick. Have you spoken to the NAACP, who seem to misunderstand how the restoration of voters' rights for felons goes? And he seemed to think he had to go find it. It seems like it's right in the code of Virginia.
Well, it's not even in the code. It's in the Constitution. And, our Constitution specifies that if someone's convicted of a felony, they lose their rights. And it's not a governor's decision. It's the Constitution. And it also very clearly specifies that the restoration of those rights is a decision that a governor makes. Our Supreme Court has come out and very clearly stated that I have to do it on a case-by-case basis. And so this process of taking applications where we are making sure that everyone, when they are transitioning from incarceration back to their homes, understands the process, understands how to fill out an application, and we have staffed up in order to respond to this. This is just a very straightforward process that we're running well, I believe. We've caught our backlog all the way up through to April 30th. And so the challenges that I think have been alleged, just one, aren't true. And second of all, I think are misinformed in the process that we're running. I do believe in second chances. And I will follow the law. I will not skirt the law. And our Constitution tells me exactly what I'm supposed to do. Governor
Glenn Youngkin of the Commonwealth of Virginia. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Joe, God bless you, and thanks for giving me some time today. It's always great to be with you.
What was that website for early voting in the Commonwealth?
SecureYourVoteVirginia.com.
And that's controversial. You look at the ballot harvesting and early voting and those kind of things, and Roy's email is key to this, because I don't think a lot of conservative thinking people trust the elected officials to fully put the genie back into the bottle. And that's going to be the 2010 moment. You remember the Tea Party movement? You may not be old enough to remember the Tea Party movement, where everyone went in and said, all right, we're going to repeal and replace. And then, we made it all the way to 2017. Donald Trump's president, and he says, bring me something. And they couldn't bring them something. They had voted 17 times in show bills under repeal and replace. And then when all of a sudden there was a president that would have signed it, So, Roy, your email, and you can send one too to joe@wchv.com. Mackenzie is working hard enough back there for me, and so bless her for it. And you can call her at 866-HEY-LARS. But making her forward emails and stuff to me, that's just not my gig. So just send them directly to me at joe@wchv.com. That they don't trust the next batch of elected officials. So the real heavy sled is, can we get people out early to vote so that they can elect people who are going to stop the early voting? And do you trust them? That's going to be a tough sled going in from September 22nd here till November. And, of course, we're one of the few states with big stuff going on for election. Twitter poll, AMAC, Association of Mature American Citizens, conservative values that we believe in. I'm a member, Lars a member. Go to amac.us or call them at 888-262-2006. AMAC is better for you, better for America. And the interesting thing about this NAACP story, so the NAACP held a press conference saying Governor Youngkin is working in secret. We don't know. Governor Northam and Governor McAuliffe before him had way more right restorations. And you may not remember, but there was a blanket restoration, and it's happened in other states. And it ties in to this cashless bail Twitter poll. I'm all for somebody who's paid their debt to society getting their rights restored. But when Terry McAuliffe gave it just haphazardly back, just went, everybody gets their voting rights back, there were people on the list that he had restored their voting rights to that in one case was on the FBI's most wanted list now, and 10 incidents where they were already back in prison for something else. And you hate to see that. Recidivism is a horrible thing. But he didn't take time to look at these cases. He just said, give them all their rights back. So, of course, the statistic says that Terry McAuliffe and Ralph Northam were much more generous. And they use this all the time. This is, as we were saying earlier, they kind of salt the earth before you get there. The IRS hearings with you as well. 866-HEY-LARS. Joe Thomas in for Lars Larson tonight. Joe Thomas here for Lars Larson, and thank you. And join us, as the man said, on the phone or through emails to joe@wchv.com. I was going through some of the headlines from around the areas, and I saw this out of Honolulu. And I know Lars has this great affiliate, KHNR, out there. But I saw this story. Maui County will soon be adding surcharge on top of the general excise tax that the state already collects. The county council says the new revenue will raise money for specific types of housing infrastructure projects. 1/5 of the revenue must be dedicated to projects that help the Department of Hawaiian Homelands develop homesteads. And this has been one of these, it itches you just can't scratch. When did it become the government's job to do these things? Why did it become the government's job to do these things? Mark Warner and the Senate held a discussion about the CHIPS Act. Why do we need the government to invest in microchips? They're in everything. I'm looking around me. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 microchips all around me, and computers and transmitters and mixing boards and radios. Why do we need the government to invest in something that should be a booming industry? I mean, I've got chips in my thermostat, my refrigerator, my dishwasher. Our LED lights come with some manner of chips in it. Why do we need the government to take taxpayer money and redistribute it? It's like Greg was asking earlier. It's the left becomes the redistribution of wealth party. But there's more to it than that. Once the moniker too big to fail came along, they've also kind of put the wealthy in the country in a stasis cube. And then there's really no place for the poor or the middle class to go except kind of battle each other out for what's there. So at the end of the day, the Hunter Biden laptop testimony, the IRS whistleblowers talking about how they were stopped from continuing to dig into Hunter Biden's laptop, finished their testimony. I think there may be some more tomorrow, but it's irrelevant. It's some really powerful stuff. But they asked Kevin McCarthy about this, and I got a really, really queasy feeling about this. And it's not because it's Kevin McCarthy or anything like that. Just listen for a sec.
Here we have the Biden Inc. family being treated different than the entire country.
Okay.
That when these IRS agents went to an FBI agent that they were going to come to interview Hunter Biden, how was he treated? He was treated different than every other American.
And I started to get this queasy kind of 1994 feeling all over again. And that tax evasion is going to be this generation's blue dress. And I say that because I wanted, not because I didn't like him or I didn't think it was but I really, at that point, I was still a rock and roll radio DJ. I didn't have, political skin in the game, but I just thought if Bill Clinton could be found using his office for personal gain, I found that to be a great affront. Now, it was naive. Like I said, I was just a rock and roll DJ. We were trying to figure out how to give away Aerosmith tickets. But when I was reading about what was happening in Whitewater and the Rose Law Firm and the McDougalls, and I was starting to follow this, and I was like, I was getting really amped up that this guy had taken office and was just using the power of his office as governor of Arkansas to make himself wealthy. And the Vince Foster shredding machine and Hillary in the shredder. And, of course, she got better and new technology now. Now she has bleach bit and that kind of stuff. And then they couldn't get anything on that, so they got him into a position where he lied under oath. And so they went after the sex that he lied about under oath. And I understand lying under oath. It's a shame that we have to have extra oaths because I believe it's a mortal and eternal sin to bear false witness against thy neighbor. But we can stick a pin into why that list isn't important anymore, right? 866, hey, Lars. Whatever happened to that list? Gosh, if we only had a list that said, thou shalt not murder. That would be a great list. Then we could go worry about other things, right? We took those off our schools. Then we took them off our courthouses, and who knows where we put them all. But so they decided, well, we'll just get the guy on the lying under oath. And I felt so disappointed because if somebody is taking a position of representative authority and abusing it in such a way, I just want there to be repercussions. And I'm feeling the same way now about tax evasion. I mean, Lord only knows Hunter Biden's sexual behaviors are much more salacious than Bill Clinton's. inhale. I think Hunter has trouble exhaling sometimes. But that being said, I want them to pay the price if the case is there for selling access to our government, which, by the way, the constitutional framers did expect. A lot of people say to me, Joe, they didn't expect this. There's a blind spot in the Constitution about this. And I said, no, not really, because the restrictions on what the government had the authority to do was in its own self a firewall against this kind of corruption, this access selling. Because access to the United States federal government in 1794 was not supposed to do that much for you. So it wasn't all that important that you got access to the federal government. They couldn't do that much for you. It wasn't really until after the Civil War and U.S. Grant and then Andrew Johnson certainly, oh gosh, went through Andrew Johnson's home on the way back from Freedom Fest. Oh, don't stop here. That's like finding myself in Lyndon Johnson's home. Two presidents that did dirty to the black community. But I'm getting that queasy feeling that they're going to settle for a slap on the wrist conviction for tax evasion. He'll go to the Martha Stewart rehab clinic and he'll come back and write a book. And they'll get off scot-free, or whoever the attorney general is at the time. You're listening to the Lars Larson Show. What do you say? 866 Hey Lars. Thank you for joining us. My name is not Lars Larson. Joe Thomas from Lars's great affiliate in the second greatest city in the history of mankind, Charlottesville, Virginia. Sure, we're not living up to that status, so I hope we don't lose the silver medal. We're not going to get the gold, and so maybe we just stop trying. I don't know what it is, but the work product of a couple of our native sons has led to more people living in freedom, tenuously in some cases, than any other place in the world. So we defend at 866-439-5277. That comes out to 866 Hey Lars. You can also email me directly at joe@wchv.com. Follow us on Facebook, The Lars Larson Show, Twitter at Lars Larson Show, and you can vote in his Twitter poll brought to you by AMAC. The Twitter poll tonight has to do with whether or not they should eliminate cash bail. And I'm just fascinated that 21.5% of the respondents said yes, states should follow Illinois' lead in eliminating cash bail for criminals. Sure, 78.4% say no. But if you're one of the 21%, I know Lars has his vaunted naysayers, and I pick up on the mantra. Naysayers go right to the front of the line. Are you one of the 21% that think getting rid of cash bail for criminals is a good idea? I'd love to hear the case for that. Also, across a lot of the listening area, the wildfire smoke, we've had it as far south down here in Virginia. We've had some pretty high smoke days, and I remember Lars going on at some length about some very, very profound firefighting equipment. And I'm just, at some point, somebody has to say to Trudeau II, we're going to put these out anytime soon. And I just, the conspiracy theorist will rush in, or better put, are we conspiracy analysts? How many of these things have we been told were conspiracy theories, only to turn out to be true later on? It's becoming a all too familiar wash, rinse, repeat thing. And, of course, I brought this up in the last hour, and your thought of this at 866 Hey Lars, or email to joe@wchv.com. Is tax evasion going to be this generation's blue dress? The thing that they decide, you know what, we can get them on that. You know what, we got them. And they'll walk away from what I think is one of the most horrific corruptions, which is using the power of your office, albeit an office that's supposed to be limited in scope, for your own profit. And this email from Steve comes in and says, Joe, but if they can't prove it, they can't prove it. What would you say if you were on trial for your life and they couldn't prove it, but they all just didn't like you? I understand proving something is very difficult. That's what makes law enforcement so important, because these are the folks who go out and collect the evidence so that you can truthfully know who violated somebody else's rights. I got that. It just seems like they're already settling in on, we could get them on the tax evasion stuff. And then go back to the base and say, we got him. We got him, didn't we? We got him good. And provability is why so many of these lawyers make money. They're probably an enormous percent of lawyers never pass a bar exam. They become lawyers specifically to use law as a weapon for whatever their agenda is. That's fine. It's a country of laws, supposedly. But you watch how they set up the law. We talked about the election laws that were passed that are still in place because they were laws, and now you have to unpass the law. You can't just say, COVID-19, during the duration of COVID-19, these will be the election laws. And then when COVID-19 goes away, okay, now we're done. No, they passed them. It's like any other law. I really do wistfully look at a world where all legislation comes with a sunset. And maybe the bigger things you want to have for 10 years, smaller things maybe 2 years to see if they have any impact. But I think you should go back and discuss these things once every number of years, depending. I don't have a problem with that. But your legislators, they don't want to talk about the laws. They want to talk about the laws they've already got on the books. The laws that give them permission to redistribute monies to businesses rather than saying to the businesses, hey, go find customers for your stuff. We were mentioning the big CHIPS Act press conference earlier today in Virginia, where Mark Warner touting how much money he's going to seed through the federal government and the tax collections. Saw the statistics during the debate about debt ceiling increases. And when we start talking about trillions of dollars, it becomes an abstract, but the federal government, even in an economy that's, let's face it, dodgy. Even in this economy, the federal government is taking in $400 million a year. $400 billion a year. I mean, that's almost lottery ticket money. $400 billion a year in tax collections per month in Washington. They spend $5, but they take in $4. Think about that conceptually. That somebody, a government, because you're going to go to prison if you don't send it, is collecting $400 billion in a month. And that still isn't sufficient for the things they want to do and the things they want to invest in. And it makes me think about this Maui excise tax that's going to build affordable housing. Why is there not affordable housing? I mean, you can point to mill towns and those kind of things in Europe as a way, the company town. And so the mill, the steel mill, the wood mill, paper mill, whatever, would build workforce housing. I don't know if they built it. They would encourage it. Sometimes they would even make property available to the developers. But it costs $20,000 but before you even put a shovel into the ground. So Maui is now saying the very things that are making housing more affordable, the taxation that drives out the jobs, is going to need to ramp up. And this becomes the self-licking ice cream cone of poverty programs. At some point, you get to a point where you can't tax enough to pay the people. More to come in a moment on the Lars Larson Show. Joe Thomas sitting in for Lars tonight. We're going to talk about the idea of government as venture capitalist in a little bit with Seton Motley from Less Government. But Matt is online too, so let me get Matt's thoughts here first. Matt, I can't leave you on hold after I asked you to call at 866 Hey Lars. How are you doing?
I'm doing just great. How are you doing, Joe? I appreciate your show.
Well, I appreciate you being on the other end, because otherwise I'm just a Canadian wildfire tree falling in the woods with nobody there to breathe in the smoke. So what's on your mind?
Well, I'm just curious why nobody is bringing up actually what's going on here. So we have the Biden yo-yo crime family creating a diversion, and what the problem is that we've got the media that is falling right in with step with them, so that you're not looking at the Hunter Biden and the Joe Biden crimes that have been happening here, and they're ridiculing Donald Trump. And if they actually had a crime on Donald Trump, don't you believe that they would have already put him in jail or done something by now?
Well, I am a subscriber to the idea that these 16 folks in Michigan were indicted so that they could lean on them and find somebody who could compose. What do they say? Somebody who could sing or even maybe compose is how they say it in law enforcement. But
so
let me ask you this:
threats.
Well,
you're saying they're threatening them.
Well, they're going to look at the charges they're facing. Some of these folks are over 70. Even if they get half sentences, it's a life sentence for these folks. So I'm sure there's.
Yes, I agree.
So here's my question, though. Is Joe Biden the distraction for Hunter, or is the whole Biden thing a distraction for things like John Kerry in China and all the stuff that we were starting to find out about the World Economic Forum and the climate change treaties and things like that?
I believe this is all a distraction for what the Democrats, what their end game is, and that is to bring us to a socialist country. That's what I believe. What do you think?
Well, I think we're 90% of the way there. I mean, if you look at the amount of money, as I said, we take in $400 billion a month and we send out $500 billion a month. The president wants to give more Medicaid money to the dreamers. He keeps trying to find ways to forgive everyone's student loan debts. At some point, I read a statistic that our dollar has devalued 99 cents in the past century. 99% in the last century, and it's because we've been printing it like crazy. Don't forget, we went off the gold standard because Nixon was facing a collapse because after only 8 years, the, quote, Great Society had already nearly bankrupted the United States in these programs. It's unsustainable, and there is a healthy argument to be made for the fact that they know it's unsustainable and they're trying anyway because they truly don't believe that you or me, we can make our way in the world on our own without them organizing it. It is the globalist view. It's European, it's Eurocentric, that the people need to be assigned tasks and things like that, and that's how it gets organized. Otherwise, and they're forgetting that all this prosperity that we bring to the table for Davos and these folks is born on the fact that we had, up until about 20, 30 years ago, liberty that, we could go and find something to do and we could invent a better mousetrap, or some guy could say, hey, I can't sell this computer technology to the military anymore. I wonder if somebody will buy it for their house. And that was game changing. And it made people wealthy. It made a lot of people wealthy. But what's happened now is we've started protecting that wealth. And by protecting the wealth of those who have it, we've ruined the competitive opportunity for them to lose it. See, that's how nature actually redistributes wealth, Matt, is that rich people do something dumb and they lose all their money, but that money doesn't disappear. It goes into the economy somewhere else, and eventually somebody else earns that money and climbs up the ladder, and that's what we've frozen in time. But I think the Bidens are actually more of a distraction from the other stuff's going on than Joe is a distraction from Hunter or vice versa. So I hope that makes some sense.
Thank you for your insight and knowledge. I really appreciate you.
So I appreciate. And now we go on to the great Seton Motley from Less Government, another one of our guests that I only know because of Lars, so I guess it's only fair. Great column he wrote on his Substack. You can't have semiconductor production without patent protection. Seton, how are you doing this evening, sir?
Doing well, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. I just watched Senator Mark Warner talk about how much he's looking forward to the federal government investing in something that everyone has 8,000 of in their house. I don't know why the federal government, of all the industries under the sun, we need to subsidize the microchip business. But maybe you have a better take on it. Why do we need to do this?
Well, we need to do this because we spent the last 40 years, 50 years exporting manufacture of everything out of the country. And look, I'm not a big, you know me, I'm not a big fan of government investment in anything. But even this bill, I was for the semiconductor only because we need to play catch up. Our chief supplier of semiconductors, which as you'll acknowledge, is pretty important in today's economy, is, drum roll please, China is our number one semiconductor provider.
Great.
We don't make them anymore. And so, because we spent decades exporting everything, and everything, semiconductors are a subset of everything. So we've got to get it back here. Now, the money is wasted because in 2011, we passed a law that fundamentally strip-mined patent protection in the United States. Now, when you invent a new semiconductor under normal circumstances, what are you going to do? You're going to patent it because you want to protect it so you can make money off it. Well, we've undermined, with the American Invents Act of 2011, we strip-mined our patent protection system in the United States. China paid much attention to that and started welcoming inventors to China, which is especially ironic because, of course, they steal $600 billion a year of our intellectual property. One of their incentives they offer to companies is, if you invent it here and manufacture it here, we won't steal it from you. And so we're shoving inventors out the door, and China's welcoming them in. And of course, you can't have a semiconductor manufacturing until you first innovate these semiconductors. And we don't allow that anymore because we don't protect innovation anymore.
Well, it's the amazing thing because, the American greenies will talk about not wanting manufacturing because in the 70s their grandparents saw an Indian standing by a river on TV crying. And so now we have to pay the price for this. And this is the best kind of manufacturing. There's no smokestacks involved. I'll bet you most of it can be done with laser printers anyway, or 3D printers. Seton, I'm running up on the bottom of the hour here. Can I hang on to you? Because I really want to get into this patent protection. And please subscribe to his Substack at Less Government. And is it Less Government at Substack?
No, it's just lessgovernment.org.
Okay, just go right there and get these columns. Yep. And this isn't even the most recent one he's written, so just join in. But when we get back from the break, I want to ask him about the patent protection he's talking about and the America Invents Act, which actually stops us from inventing only in America, on the Lars Larson Show. And you can follow me at Joe Thomas WCHV. That's the Twitter handle for me. You'll find most recent tweets as tune in as we take the seat behind Lars Larson's microphone here. We weren't able to hold on to Seaton, but I want to pick up on the idea of protecting intellectual property. And again, this goes back to globalism. And I say this because I tend to be wonky in some ways. And if Seaton's out there and he's like, hey, what happened? Oh, it may be his cell service. I don't know. If every country on the planet said, we want to institute the Bill of Rights and the U.S. Constitution as you guys had it when you guys started out, or some semblance of it, but the core of it has to be the Bill of Rights, I'd be fine with a global government. Just like I get people bent out of shape when I say if a country believes in the Bill of Rights and the Ten Commandments, I don't have a problem with being nationalistic for that kind of government, because it's citizen-centered. The trouble is you give power to people and they abuse it. We found Seaton. He was there in the Mark Warner waiting room because he knows so much about cell phone service that he was able to get us squared away. Seaton. So I was asking, this is so classically ironic. You talk about an act that talks about protecting American inventors, and it actually just does the exact opposite back in 2011 and strips away their patent protections. I mean, how did anyone think this was a good idea?
Well, big tech thought it was a good idea. Big tech was very forward thinking. I mean, they were very forward thinking in realizing, like Google, for example, realized somebody needed to, have a quick way to assemble a search results for the internet, and they got there first and now dominate the market at 92%. They also very wisely realized in the early 2010s they needed to start bribing everybody in D.C. and they don't want to pay for patents. So they strip mined the patent system and made it much easier to steal them. We used to do this is how dumb it is. We used to do first to invent for 200 years plus. If you invented it first, you got to patent it. This law changed it to first to file. Now, the way the patent system works, as you're working, you've got to report what you're doing. So Google and Apple and Amazon, they watch this. They sit there with their 9 million lawyers, and when someone gets close, they just file on your invention. And, before you could go into court and say, look, here's my 9 years of notes of me working on this in my garage and developing this. And Google filed on at the 11th hour on top of my head. Under the old law, the judge would go, well, clearly this guy invented it, and Google, you didn't. So we award the patent to this person, and Google, you owe them money. Now it's just whoever files first. And, me in my garage inventing something doesn't have quite the legal team that Google or Apple or Amazon does. Also, perhaps the worst part of the law was the creation of the Patent Trial and Appeal Board. And that's where you turn the patent office into a patent killing machine, where upwards of 80% of the patents that the patent office issues are then overturned because Google files 45 challenges to the patent. Apple files another 50. Facebook files 45. And you got to spend... And you got to spend $200,000 per challenge, and most people can't afford to do that except for Apple and Google and Facebook and Amazon, and they just bankrupt the person, and then it just becomes public domain, and they steal it. They'd rather steal it than pay the licensing fees, which are always minuscule anyway. It's a complete evisceration of the system. and a pox on Darrell Issa, who, by the way, is the richest man in Congress because of patents. He invented the Viper alarm system for cars, immediately patented the crap out of it, made a mint, and then ran for Congress and undermined the patent system that made him a millionaire.
Last one in's a rotten egg. So how do we fix this? Is there any interest at all?
They're trying. There's a couple bills. Look, again, this is what's frustrating about DC. There's this pride of authorship. You want to fix this? Repeal it. Just vote to undo what you did in 2011. Instead, the same morons who screwed it up in the first place are now trying to tweak what they screwed up in the first place. No, to paraphrase Jesse Jackson, don't mend it, end it. It's a terrible. It was a terrible idea from the outset. You screwed up. I wrote a piece weeks ago where I talked about mulligans in golf. And and remember when you were a kid and you hit the ball into the electrical wires or into someone's tree. Do-over. We need a do-over.
Right.
Just take a do-over. Hey, we screwed up. Hey, we messed up. This bill's terrible. Here's a bill repealing it. And of course, even the PTAB was even ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court didn't say you have to kill it. They added another level of unconstitutionality to it. Because it's the executive branch pretending to be the judicial. You've got judges in the executive branch. That's unconstitutional because these PTAB judges. Well, so what the court ruled was said that's unconstitutional. Our solution is the head of the patent office has to review what the judges say. No, that's another level of unconstitutionality. That doesn't solve it. That exacerbates it. So again, we just need a mulligan, a do-over, and to repeal these laws. And look, these are very well-intentioned attempted fixes, but I don't have confidence that they're tweaking the bad bill is going to be nearly as effective as just repealing the bad bill.
Well, and I will, maybe it's correlation, not causation, but since 2011, you talk about Mark Warner's CHIPS Act kind of being necessary to get us caught up. Isn't this patent protection bill kind of track along with when we started falling way behind the other countries in innovation?
In 2011, there was there's an innovation ranking in the world. It started in 2011. Coincidentally, when we passed this stupid bill. And we were number one or number two every year before that. And then they had this official innovation index. And we were 1 and 2 for about 2 or 3 years. And then by 2015, we dropped out of the top 10.
Gosh,
that's precipitous. Because of this bill. This is not post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means it follows therefore because of. It does. This is a direct result. This is again, this is the intention. Just like you said, the badly named America Invents Act, the Affordable Care Act was intended to make healthcare unaffordable, and it has. This bill was intended to make it easier to steal patents and destroy innovation and invention. It has. Yeah. So again, I don't want to try to, the patient's dead. Stop trying to do a facelift on it.
Well, we got to get it right, and again, because we used to be, and this is what made America great, was that we did the innovation and we had the people working around the clock. Lessgovernment.org. Seton Motley, is so good to catch up with you. Thank you, sir, and we'll talk to you again very soon. And your chance to get with us next on the Lars Larson Show. It's Joe Thomas here for Lars. Tonight we'll be here Friday night as well for First Amendment Friday. I'm looking forward to that. And you guys ask great questions. I'm telling you, it is awesome. To get, you have to gameplay it out. And I don't understand. I've known an awful lot of elected officials. I really have. More than I ever set out in life to know. I have met every kind of elected official up to and including vice presidents. Never met anyone. Well, no, that's not true. I briefly met George W. Bush when he came to Charlottesville as a guest of the Immigration and Naturalization ceremony. Just briefly, he said hello to me. So I can't say I didn't meet a president, but I mean, have a substantive conversation. Senators, congressmen, governors, delegates, state senators, supervisors, city councilors, you name it. And what I can't figure out politically is why the message of free markets and unlimited opportunity doesn't sell in their mind. What is it that this says? No, we want to have. I've had friends tell me that because the safety net and the momisms of the progressive campaign is so hard to shake off. But if you break out issue by issue, it has been my experience, and maybe yours as well. 866, hey Lars. That if you break out issue by issue, you take personality away from it. Maybe you like this congressman because he helped you get your COVID money for your business, or you like this president because he tweets the same things you wish you had thought of saying, or whatever. Whatever it may be, you may have popularity attached to a personality. But if you take personality out of it and just voted for policy, 75% of the country is hardcore. And I mean hardcore. Make William F. Buckley squeamish, conservative. Property rights, the right to defend yourself, the right to be private. And we're getting more so. We're getting more, not less. And I think that's part of the, Matt was asking us earlier about the distractions. And why are they, doing this? It's the same reason they brought back white supremacy here in my hometown of Charlottesville after our summer of discontent in 2017, when David Duke walked past me and Terry McAuliffe ordered the rioters pushed together on the street, two little tiny bits of the story that nobody ever reported. Pretty seminal to it. But they used just like they did in 1917. They used the threat of the knights in white satin. Only then they didn't have tiki torches from the Home Depot to march with. They actually had to go fashion their own torches. And they were horrific. But they were the useful tools of the authoritarian to say, well, look at what's going on here. All these freed slaves, they need our protection. And they started to metastasize this nationalist government, this authoritarian state, with intentions that may have been pure as the driven snow. But at some point, a puppy comes along and makes that snow not so pure. And when the authority was taken, that's when the corruption moves in. I don't know who that was, but sorry they didn't hang on the line with us. Only a few moments left, but you'll get your chance on Friday. But once you've established governmental authority, it doesn't matter. It could be your home county. Once the county establishes that it has the right to hand out something, the corruption moves in. I want to thank again AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. It has conservative values that you and I and Lars believe in. I'm a member, you're a member, we're a member too. Go to amac.us or call 888-262-2006. AMAC is better for you and better for America. Our Twitter poll, sponsored by AMAC, and I'm still fascinated by the number of people who have voted in the minority here. Should states follow Illinois' lead in eliminating cash bail for criminals? Approaching 23% have said yes. 77% said no. Of course, that's right. I mean, bail is expressed in the U.S. Bill of Rights, that you have a right to, not be held to pay ridiculous bail. But the idea that we've arrested you for violating somebody else's rights and we're just going to let you go because now we have your name, there has to be a better transaction in that. But it's a puzzlement. 22%. That really surprised me. Again, thanks to AMAC. Better for America, better for all of us there. And in membership, and if you're an early adopter of AMAC, like I was, there was some lean times where it didn't nearly have the discounting heft that some of its other fellows in the senior membership clubs did, but it has changed. They are out there, and they can do stuff for you. So I appreciate it, and we will check in with you again tomorrow, Friday night. Friday night we'll get cooking on the program. But just be aware that as soon as the government takes the authority to do something for you, that's when the corruption moves in, because then you will be moved to a place where your expenditures, and you may even say, well, I'm just spending a government subsidy. Yes, but you're trafficking in it. You're laundering that money to make it appear that this corporation has sold you something that you purchased, and they can claim, and then the federal government takes taxes. Again, money laundering 101. And that's what we have to get away from that. That's why I talk. Mark Meckler may join us on Friday's show. I'm a member of the Convention of States movement. So we'll talk about that a little bit, because I think it's the only thing the Constitution says about getting the Constitution back. My name is Joe Thomas. Until Friday night, so long, and thanks for all the fish.